Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece Chapter 1120 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Another week passes, another epic chapter of One Piece. I really was not prepared to feel anything for Atlas's inevitable death. But look at that, here we are. Who'd have thought? Not me. Oda's literally got this designed to such a point that he's got a button. It's the emotional button. He presses it whenever he damn well pleases, and then you feel something. I'm actually not entirely sure why it works or how it works, but I can tell you that it works. But yeah, just spitballing out loud, right? Egghead is an island that is sort of trapped in time, right? It's the future island Egghead, but it is in fact reflective of the past, and so it exists in this ambiguous time period by nature. We talked about this a lot in the lead up to the climactic events at the end of this arc, but like for instance, Vegapunk's message is the One Piece. That is like what we should be paralleling it to. Ultimately, what has occurred here is just a small teaser of what's going to occur at the end of the story when the actual One Piece is found. This is the pregame. But the interesting twist here is that Egghead is the past, the present, and the future. Vegapunk, the scientist, the leader of Egghead, has recorded this message. He is the narrator of the poneglyph, so to speak. He's basically supposed to be Joeboy. That's who he represents. In the same way that his island is actually an island of the past, it is the island of the ancient kingdom. He died, but he left behind a message that people could find, a voice they could hear. The altars are conceptually those that have inherited Vegapunk's will. In this case, they are literally aspects of Vegapunk. And in this time capsule arc, they are protecting Vegapunk's message and protecting the people who need to hear it so that they can do something in the future. I really hope that this isn't too confusing, but you can just think about the Egghead arc as being the short story form of the larger story. Vegapunk secretly recorded his message in the same way as the Ancient Kingdom secretly recorded their story on the poneglyphs, both likely intended for this story to be revealed under very specific conditions. It wasn't supposed to be revealed immediately. A cool inversion is that Vegapunk intended for the message to go live when he died, but Joeboy from the past likely intended for this message to go live when he returned, 800 years in the future. This is why Roger did not reveal the contents of the poneglyphs despite discovering and hearing the entire message. It wasn't the right time. It tells you that there is supposed to be a right time, which we already kind of knew because Odin knew that Joeboy would appear 20 years in the future. Like, they had this thing mapped out to an absurd degree. When Roger tells us that he wishes to have been alive during the time of Joeboy, it carries two meanings. One, he's talking about Joeboy from the Void Century, but two, he's likely talking about Joeboy as in Luffy. But Roger was too early. But going deeper into the headcanon, we know that Vegapunk's message cuts off whenever the ancient giant robot loses power. So it's possible that another condition that Vegapunk had to release this message is the ancient giant robot being powered up, which is not something he had the ability to do. The reality is, as it's been painted to us so far, is that Gear 5th, Luffy Awakened, or Nika turns the robot on. So even though Vegapunk couldn't directly control this, it is probable that Nika had to actually be here for Vegapunk's message to be released to the world. Vegapunk's One Piece quote-unquote required the return of Nika and Joeboy, which is the exact criteria that Joeboy himself needed to reveal the poneglyphs. I know it's counterintuitive, I know that we're supposed to think, oh, Vegapunk died, then the message is released, but if the robot is not powered, then supposedly nothing is gonna happen. It just so happened that Luffy happened to be here with his awakened devil fruit. Makes you want to reconsider some of those panels during the middle of the Egghead arc where the Stella Vegapunk reacts to Luffy being Nika. He's probably in his mind thinking, oh shit, it's really going down. I'm really supposed to die here. But of course, we've already said that Vegapunk is supposed to be conceptually Joeboy. Well, the same applies to all of his altars. I think that what Oda is going for here is that over the course of 800 years, right, there's been many people that are Joeboy candidates. And these are represented by Vegapunk's altars, Joeboy candidates, carrying the will of Joeboy or the will of Vegapunk. So thinking about it this way, it was kind of the point to have all of these altars die, or most of them. They're failed Joeboys. And the reason that I bring this up is that as I read the chapter, I kind of thought of Atlas as, you know, something like Goldie Roger. Both Roger and Atlas basically turned themselves in. They allowed themselves to be executed. They intended that. You think Roger sacrificed himself? You think that's how he would describe what he did? Absolutely not. No, Roger lended a hand to the future. Just the same as Odin, he already knows that Joy Boy is supposed to appear 20 years in the future. This is why Whitebeard comments in Marineford when looking at Blackbeard, "You're not the one that Roger was waiting for. Roger was waiting for somebody." He knew that Joy Boy was supposed to make their appearance soon, and he thought it would be his son, which is likely why Whitebeard was protecting Ace. But long story short is that Roger's execution, the reason he turned himself in, all of it was a setup for the future. He could have died quietly in some corner of the world drinking tequila and chilling on the beach. He chose to not do that. So Roger made sure the adventure of Joy Boy could continue, like Atlas made sure that the adventure of Luffy Joy Boy could continue. But yeah, speaking to the actual chapter itself, all of this was just really powerful. Again, I can't explain why it just was. Atlas coming in and just absolutely hammering Lilith with a punch of love, and then going out like a boss. If ever I've got to go, I want to go out like that. We've had a few scenes like this throughout the post-time skip, but honestly guys, for me, this is probably the best. I felt the most. But of course, you can't talk about the story without talking more in depth about Lilith. In this case, I see Lilith as an aspect of Vegapunk, also Joy Boy, but Lilith is the final Joy Boy. She is Luffy, the Joy Boy who's gonna make it to the end. A lot of people right now are talking about Jewelry Bonnie as a Straw Hat Crew member, and I'm behind that. I like Bonnie. I think that there's a lot that is there. But I feel like not enough people are talking about Lilith as a future Straw Hat member. The only reason why I wouldn't, and I think that Oda might not, is that maybe Vegapunk or Lilith knows too much. Because I mean, technically, Vegapunk is an expert doctor, expert engineer, also kind of an archaeologist, right? It starts to usurp certain aspects of the crew that Oda might not want to go to. But the way that I see it is that Lilith is going to continue traveling with the Strats to Elbaf, and then after Elbaf, you basically have just the end of the story. So if Lilith is and Vegapunk is present in Elbaf, you just need to continue traveling on the ship. Like, why wouldn't you do that? And she's got her big dream of the Eternal Flame. Vegapunk has basically explained this in his message, but he's kind of envious, it seems that way, of the Roger Pirates. They discovered the entire truth. So it would make sense for Lilith to desire, at the very least, to continue traveling with the Straw Hats to the end of the Grand Line. There's something for her there. But yeah, you guys know it's not a coincidence that the two Vegapunks that remain, that will likely remain to the end of the story, are the evil, quote-unquote evil Vegapunk, and the greed Vegapunk. And it is in fact the greed Vegapunk which is the evil Vegapunk, and the evil Vegapunk is not really evil at all. Oda is actually saying quite a lot. I think what really defines Lilith more than anything else is that Lilith is not beholden to rules. She is the lawless Vegapunk. But following or not following laws does not make you a good or evil person. That is some social commentary for you, especially when the actual evil people are the ones making the law and the order. But it is interesting to think about what is good and what is evil in the real world or in the story of One Piece. Like how would you actually define that? And maybe that question is just too big, but in the story of One Piece, it's definitely related to whether or not you're loyal and you fight for your friends at whatever risk to yourself. Like caring for the well-being of others is important to make you a good person. The greed Vegapunk, York, absolutely lacks this and betrayed all of her family. The only thing which seems to matter to her at all is herself. It is a self-centered ambition. And this is actually a great parallel between York and Lilith, because I think that both are really ambitious. I mean, Vegapunk generally is ambitious. I think all the alters are that to some extent. But I think that we understand that Lilith got the evil tag because she broke the rules that the other Vegapunks wouldn't. But why did she do that? At the very beginning of the Egghead arc, we get some context, and it's clear that she's aiming for breaking these rules for the benefit of all the other Vegapunks. Their dreams, their ambitions, their research. She is willing to do what the others are not, so that they all get what they want. Honestly, guys, I said this from the very beginning of the arc, the literal very beginning of the arc. Once we knew that Vegapunk had multiple alters, I expected all of them to die, with the exception of Lilith. And I thought that Lilith would continue traveling with the Strats because she is most pirate-like. Specifically, she is most Straw Hat pirate-like. She does what she wants with no regrets, for the benefit of both herself and the crew. It's a more altruistic ambition. But anyway, guys, just to end this thought, we already have a theory that currently in the world, there are actually two Joy Boy candidates. We all know that Luffy is going to be Joy Boy, but, and I'll include this as a link in the description, I have a theory that Blackbeard also fits aspects of the prophecy and actually has the potential to become an evil Joy Boy. I just think that when we get the verbatim prophecy, you're going to see that Oda and Blackbeard have been positioning themselves so that they fulfill the criteria of Joy Boy as well in a more sinister way. Blackbeard is of the D family. Blackbeard, if he wins, will turn the world upside down. He has the potential of finding the One Piece. He has the potential to actually steal Luffy's Devil Fruit, if that is required. In this arc, it sets up Caribou allying himself with the Blackbeard pirates, meaning that Blackbeard is probably very soon going to attempt to acquire the ancient weapons. Meaning Blackbeard could find his way to Fishman Island, capture Shirahoshi, and fulfill Luffy's promise to her. And also potentially Joy Boy's promise to Poseidon from back in the day, but just in the worst way that you could imagine. He also has a crew which will rival the Straw Hats, comprised of the most notorious criminals. Shiryu might have the potential to become the world's strongest swordsman. They even have similar bullet point feats in the story. Both of them infiltrated and escaped Impel Down, having acquired new allies. Both of them were present in Marineford and survived. Both of them have become Yonko by defeating other Yonko. If you don't consider this true with Whitebeard, I think you will definitely consider it true if Blackbeard defeats Shanks in the future. But like I said, I'll leave this video as a link in the description. If you haven't watched it, it's pretty good. But the reason that I bring it up is that, coincidence or not, you have your Joy Boy figure from Egghead, Vegapunk. And after the dust has settled, only 2 Vegapunks remain. Your 2 Joy Boy candidates, your metaphorical good and evil. Lilith represents Luffy, and York represents Blackbeard. I think that it's probably going to be true that by the end of the story, only one of these Vegapunks will remain. And depending on which one it is, drastically affects the continued legacy of Vegapunk. Just the same as depending on who wins between Blackbeard and Luffy, drastically affects the continued legacy of Joy Boy and how Joy Boy will shape the world. But yeah, we really went off here. I just felt like all of this conversation is relevant to get the best appreciation possible for what I feel like was going on in the chapter. It just adds that extra weight to Atlas's death beyond, what we actually felt reading it. But Atlas's death wasn't the only thing from this chapter that I really enjoyed. Starting from page 1, you have Vegapunk's flashback with Clover. This is the kind of One Piece stuff that I just love reading. Not because it's necessarily epic as you read it, but it's thought-provoking. Finally, after all of these years, Clover makes more sense, right? There was just a big hole as to how the island of Ohara became what it was when it was destroyed, and now those gaps are filled in. Clover was a member of the D family. He had a brother that was shot for being a member of this family, and from that point forward, he had to know why. Honestly, this is just another example of the world government shooting themselves in the foot. They're creating the mystery that is compelling people to discover the truth. Clover doesn't create the scholars of Ohara if they don't kill his brother. Most likely. Just the same as Nico Robin probably doesn't set out on her adventure, doesn't join the Straw Hats if it weren't for the government taking out Clover, as well as her entire island. And again, the events that are happening in Egghead right now with Vegapunk does not do them if they don't kill Clover. It's a repetitive theme in the story that the world government basically creates their own enemies. A fitting foil to Luffy, who creates his own allies from his enemies. All of this is very intentionally designed by Oda. Luffy is protecting his friends while seeking the truth of the world. The government is killing their friends as they attempt to cover up the secrets of the world. But I'd say at the end of the day, with this flashback, it made me kind of frustrated at Vegapunk. Vegapunk's smartest man in the world does not mean that he did not and does not make mistakes. It's like literally written into the design of his character because everything that he invents has some sort of flaw, despite how smart he is. Once again, there is a reason why the hero of the story, the guy who's ultimately going to save the world, is Luffy, who is basically an idiot. Going back to the comparisons of Vegapunk and Joy Boy, Vegapunk's dreams overall were good, wholesome, and for the betterment of everybody. He wanted to create a power source which would bring peace to the world. But I think that you can safely say that too much thinking got in the way. Like in the conversation with Clover, Vegapunk already had it all figured out, and he told him that point blank. He said, look, the only reason why you are alive right now is so that you can lead the world government back to your hive. The premise is that your life is worth more if you are alive. Doing what's right comes secondary. And Vegapunk undoubtedly believed this because this is the story of his life. Vegapunk subjected himself to the authority of the world government. He gave away his freedom while still dreaming of making the world a better place. He did what he felt like he needed to in order to survive, to continue this dream, because he thought it could actually be accomplished while he was a world government slave. But the moral of the story is very clear. He should have listened to Gold D. Roger and pursued the meaning of freedom. Without freedom, his dream will remain elusive. I almost think that Vegapunk feared dying before he could change the world. But it just speaks to what it is that he did not understand, because he changed the world most after he died. So in retrospect, it's very obvious that Clover was right. Clover probably accomplished more than Vegapunk, both in life and in death, by simply doing what it is that he felt like was right, without compromise. And it's like, damn, this is some powerful stuff. But like going even deeper into the conversation, this line in particular kind of triggered me. Vegapunk told Clover, let the past remain shrouded. You won't find the answer to good and evil in a bunch of old stories. And in my opinion, this just speaks to Vegapunk's arrogance. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. But Vegapunk didn't feel like he needed history, because he thought he could see the future. A future which, ironically, led him to the past. Think about that. Everything that Vegapunk was striving to invent, the future as he saw it, right, has already been created from a forgotten past. And ultimately, it was after he started to pursue these secrets of the past that he leveled up his own experiments. But honestly, guys, as a personal anecdote, I feel like this message and this sin applies heavily to me. Sometimes I would rather discover something and be the one to discover it than find out that it has already been discovered. But I suppose in a way, it isn't all that dissimilar to somebody like Luffy, furthering the connections between Vegapunk and Luffy. Luffy knows that the Roger Pirates already found everything that there is to find, but don't tell him that. He wants to find it for himself. Or maybe a better way of putting it is he wants to adventure in his own way. Part of me definitely wonders whether at this part of the story, in this flashback, Vegapunk already had clues that the future might be found in the past. Vegapunk is from Karakuri Island, and we know that there were automata on Karakuri Island created by Dr. Tsukimi. But these were technology of the past that we saw on the moon. Things like the ancient giant robot, Vegapunk might already have had that technology. And maybe that was part of the reason why he was so scared of the past. Kind of like Luffy, he didn't want to know. But I want to make sure that you guys realize that the character growth was there for Vegapunk. That's why we're having the events in Egghead that we're having. And the last panel of this chapter sort of illustrates that. Earlier in his life, Vegapunk thought that he could see the future. He thought he could predict it. And it was through the events that occurred in his life that he realized that that was not the case. And the last panel of this chapter is sort of this admission. Vegapunk is anticipating an unknown future. He realizes that he's along for the ride as much as everybody else. But to continue Clover and Vegapunk's conversation, Vegapunk says, well, you won't find the answers to good and evil in a bunch of stories. And I thought that Clover's response was genius, because Clover made it clear he wasn't looking for the answers to good and evil. He wanted to know something more tangible, more present. Why did my brother die right in front of me? And I think that this beautifully illustrates another issue that Vegapunk had, is that he thought too big. Again, a great foil of Luffy who does not think big at all. It is the immediate present which matters to Luffy. But Vegapunk didn't want to live in the present. But despite all the criticism that I'm throwing out at Vegapunk right now, like, it's very clear that this encounter with Clover did mean something to him, and he did eventually learn from it, even if it took a really long time to sort of break him out of his own nature. And the main reason I think that this worked is another fitting parallel between Vegapunk and Luffy is that they definitely both had big hearts. Vegapunk might not always have shown it, but it was definitely there. But anyway, on a more technical note, another way in which Ohara makes more sense now is, and this was translated probably poorly, I am curious as to interpretations of the actual Japanese, but it seems like it's almost implied that Clover could hear the voice of all things. It appears as though he could hear what he describes as the voice of the past. And honestly, I hope that this is true, and I think that it makes the story make more sense, because I don't know how you translate the poneglyphs without it. Like, think about all the dead languages of the past. Ancient Egyptian as an example. You can't just read the characters and decipher their meaning. The way that we were able to do this is by using the Rosetta Stone. There was literally a block of stone which contained the same text written in 3 different languages, including Ancient Egyptian. Likewise, it makes so much more sense for Clover to be able to begin to translate the ancient language if he could hear the voice of the poneglyph first. He possessed a translation to compare it to. But all this is incredibly on topic for the end of the chapter as well. This just seems like something that Oda put in the same chapter for a reason. But of course, you're talking about potentially the voice of all things with Clover being able to translate the poneglyphs. And then at the end of the chapter, it's obviously the voice of all things. Luffy can hear the robot despite nobody else being able to, because Luffy obviously has the voice of all things. Can I just get crazy for a moment, guys? That's all I want to do right now. I really just want to get crazy, and that's it. Like, clearly, right? You could put this together. The ancient giant robot speaks in the same way as the poneglyphs. They both possess the same technology. And I'm specifically using that word here, guys, technology. The poneglyphs are technology. This is an interesting question because Luffy has never stated that he could hear the voice of the poneglyphs like Rayleigh tells us that Roger could, but now that Luffy is hearing the robot, I assume that the next poneglyph that we encounter, Luffy will be able to hear it. We'll actually hear its voice, and my strong suspicion right now is that there is an entity similar to Emmet inside of every poneglyph. That is your voice from the past, and it's just instructed to tell a story. But at this point, we need to remind ourselves that the Ancient Kingdom was incredibly advanced. The things that they did is all technology. It's not necessarily magic. So imagine Emmet existing during the Void Century, right? It's a soldier, and a soldier needs to receive commands, and probably the soldier needs to communicate with somebody at some point in time. So you not only need the technology to give it a voice, but you also need a technology in order to hear it and communicate with it. Basically, guys, I think the voice of all things is also a technology that has been inherited by some people. If you've been following the channel for the last couple years, you know that I think that people in the One Piece world have been bioengineered. They are basically similar to Sanji, but they could reproduce and have children, and so this bioengineering has kind of been somewhat diluted over time. But I literally think that Luffy or Clover or Roger or anybody else who has the voice of all things have inherited this from their bioengineered ancestor. They are the descendants of augmented humans. Basically, I think that the Void Century fiddled with the genetics of certain people during their era in order to integrate them into this technological system. This feels so much more substantiated to me because Emmet likely had a role in Ancient Kingdom society. It doesn't just have a voice, it was given this voice, and you need people to be able to receive it or hear it. So at this point, I think that it's important to clarify that the voice of all things is different than the breath of all things. Zoro had the ability to hear the breath of all things, like every inanimate object around him had a sort of presence which he could attune with. But it's different than the voice of all things, which is literally like things that have a voice that people can't hear. So when you're looking at examples of the use of the voice of all things throughout the story, you're talking about, for instance, the Sea Kings, Zunisha, the poneglyphs, and now Emmet. Guys, I think that you should be thinking about all of these things as a creation of science. All of them were created by the Ancient Kingdom. But to flesh out the idea even more, we know now, and this has not actually been explained quite yet, but Vegapunk was able to give inanimate objects devil fruits, and those devil fruits gave inanimate objects a kind of personality, a soul. I wonder what the Ancient Kingdom's version of this technology was, and if it relates to some of these things. Like they gave Emmet a kind of soul. But to really go off the deep end, you guys also know that I believe that as there is a Punk Records currently in the story, I think that there was something very similar to Punk Records that existed during the Void Century. There was a centralized brain or server that pretty much everybody in the world connected to and stored the world's information. When this was turned off or deactivated or people disconnected from it, they lost all their history. I'm sitting here wondering whether some people, particularly those with the voice of all things, can still tap into this, which still exists. The Punk Records of the Void Century still exists somewhere and still works. People just can't interface with it, or at least most people can. The communication that is taking place between Luffy and Emmet right now, or Luffy and the poneglyphs in the future, is kind of similar to how we as humans right now in the real world communicate online, without our actual voices. Maybe you can think about something like a poneglyph being a website or an app. The people in the world right now, they don't have the internet and they don't have a computer. But some people were bioengineered. They possess something in their genetics themselves, which allows them to browse. I don't know, guys, maybe this is too crazy, but One Piece becomes more and more a sci-fi in my mind as the days go by. I think that there's something like another dimension that exists layered over top the One Piece world. And that idea isn't crazy for the story of One Piece because we have multiple devil fruits which tap into alternate dimensions. So during the Void Century, there was an internet dimension, and some people still have access. But at the very least, I think that this fits well, added on to Vegapunk's continued speech in the chapter. He said, "Someone once told me that the voices of the past call out. History is written by the victors, and the words of the vanquished are usually cast into a deep, dark ocean." The losers of the Void Century were obviously the Ancient Kingdom. I think that the words of the Ancient Kingdom were cast into a metaphorical deep, dark ocean, an entirely different plane of reality. But that being said, their truth can still come to light if the oppressed carry it on their backs and endure. So long as the D survives, those that connect to these voices of the past, they can reveal it. But anyway, the action of this chapter was just incredible. I enjoyed every moment of it. Atlas, the Gorosei. You know, I was kind of hyped up for the ancient giant robot to do anything, but when it tried to activate but was too broken, like on one hand, I wanted to be disappointed in that because I wanted to see it do something cool, which was exactly the vibe of Luffy. But on the other hand, it's like, yeah, I guess this does make sense. Damn it, Oda set up that joke perfectly. Also, the joke of the robot calling Luffy Joy Boy, and Luffy's like, huh? Spectacular. But yeah, overall, it does seem like the arc is winding down. There's still some tension left at the end of the chapter, but I presume that it will be resolved relatively soon, and Egghead will end. That is how it feels. But as always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Whether you notice something from the chapter that I might have missed, just share your thoughts. Remember, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.